मुनाफे का बहरान शिद्दत इख्तियार करता जा रहा है, गरीब अवाम परेशान है। A food crisis, an acute shortage of fuel, a hungry nation, a starving industry, a dying economy. What has happened to Pakistan? Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching World Today. This week we'll focus on Pakistan's worst economic crisis, which has led to an unprecedented unrest in the country. Now, while we have seen commentary from Pakistan on how the three wars with India are the reasons for the situation, we shall dissect and analyze if that could even be in the realm of possibility. Beset by a serious economic crisis with decades-high inflation, Pakistan is facing its worst crisis. Exacerbated by energy and food shortages as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war and devastating floods that wreaked havoc in many parts of the country last year. According to World Bank's latest report, Pakistan is South Asia's weakest economy, with the economic output not only declining itself but bringing down the regional growth rate as well. And the forecast shows economic growth to slow further to 2% during the current year, according to World Bank's Global Economic Prospects report.
Pakistan has learned its lesson. We had 3 wars with India, 3. And the consequence of those wars, as a result, it only brought more miseries,
to the
unemployment,
2 nations,
poverty, and millions were demoted from their level of satisfaction to a lower level of satisfaction. We have learnt our lesson and we want to live in peace with India, provided we are able to resolve our genuine problems.
Don't want to go with a begging bowl. A nuclear state, Pakistan today is struggling to stay afloat, seeking fresh economic packages and bailouts from international financial institutions and country allies. Like the UAE, where Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif visited and got assurances for an additional $1 billion to help the cash-strapped nation. At the time of its independence, like India, Pakistan was also a poor and primarily agriculture-based economy. It took steps to restructure its economy, which paid off. But for how long? The intrinsic difference between India and Pakistan is that the former has had a democratic setup from the word go. On the contrary, Pakistan has been a case of continued military rule with a civilian government as a substructure, with none completing its 5-year term. A democracy in a shambles. Pakistan inherited a smaller but fertile land to govern, with more per capita GDP at the beginning of their journey. In the first few decades of its existence, Pakistan began to be viewed as a model of planned economic development, a model emulated by South Korea. Fast forward to now, South Korea's GDP per capita is about 30 times that of Pakistan. The growth did not last for a long time as the country experienced a number of destabilizing events. Wars with India and rising inequality played an important role. While the Pakistani government of Shehbaz Sharif tried to blame wars with India for their financial troubles, but that wasn't the only factor. Political crisis of the late 1960s and the cruel racial discrimination against Bengalis of East Pakistan ended up with the crisis of 1971, war with India, and the consequence was the separation of East Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh. In the 1970s, the government moved towards nationalization, which discouraged the private sector investments and growth. In the 1980s, nationalization policy was reversed, leading to a marginal growth. But then came the Soviet invasion of neighboring Afghanistan, an opportunity in the ultimate crisis that would go on for 2 decades. Massive amounts of US aid reached Pakistan, but where did the money go? Notably, the 80s saw remittances from Pakistanis working abroad peak and impact positively the GDP. But that was not enough to service the country's budget deficit. In the 90s, the remittances declined, but the loans continued to mount. In 1998, Pakistan joined the nuclear club. International sanctions followed and the economy crumbled. Rising instability, terrorism, terror factories and inconsistent public policies undermined public confidence, ending up with further rounds of IMF bailouts being sought. Debt to GDP peaked in the years to follow. So the question is Pakistan under a debt trap? Now, what is a debt trap? When an individual, an entity or a country is unable to service the debt or its interest, default in paying on time leads to a mountain of interest that gets added up to the primary loan in time, making it impossible to repay the debt. Pakistan's external debt continues to accumulate and they must borrow more dollars to repay old loans. This has passed down generations. Pakistan is facing a major debt trap, one which will be very difficult to wriggle out of. Pakistan has failed to increase exports, which is stuck at 23 to 24 billion US dollars a year. Reduced foreign reserves as they import more than they export. Over the years, Pakistan has taken loans from international financial institutions as also from other nations like the International Monetary Fund, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and China. The most worrying is the last one. Loans from China and their increasing dependence on Chinese money through the CPEC projects, which is part of Xi Jinping's global flagship, the Belt and Road Initiative. But even with more than $62 billion worth of Chinese investments, the project hardly creates jobs for Pakistanis. Most of the work is done by the Chinese. The other important aspect is the obnoxious levels of corruption in the country. According to Transparency International's Corruption Index, Pakistan is ranked 140 out of the 180 nations they looked into, with a score of 28 out of 100, which clearly means Pakistan is failing miserably. To top that, Pakistan's army, its establishment, has used terrorism as an instrument of state policy and ended up in the International Financial Watchdog's list more than once. In fact, it has the rare honor of being among the few countries to have made it to the blacklist. What does that mean? Pakistan is accused of terror financing and money laundering, which landed them in the Financial Action Task Force's grey list. The country is estimated to have lost more than $38 billion in lost opportunities as international investors shy away from a country that cannot assure stability and security. Like Sri Lanka, Pakistan should also look at cutting their defense spending. Finally, the minorities in Pakistan are the worst sufferers. Seems like Pakistan has not learned its lessons from the East Pakistan debacle, even when there wasn't an economic crisis such as this. Back then, it was the Bengalis. Today, it is the people of Gilgit-Baltistan and Balochistan who are impacted the most adversely, with very little supplies really reaching them. So while the national debt is a staggering 88% of the GDP, far higher than the 50% target set by Pakistan's parliament, the real problems are policy paralysis and non-inclusive approach of the Pak government and of the Pakistani establishment. On Spotlight this weekend, I'm being joined by Aisha Siddiqa, who is a senior fellow at the Department of War Studies, King's College, London. Thank you so much, Aisha, for joining us here on World Today. The country, your country, Pakistan, is suffering from a tremendous economic crisis. We're seeing the blame game. We see how the administration now is talking about the reasons and saying that wars with India did cost Pakistan, and it did. But can that be the only reason why Pakistan is facing or is in such dire strait?
See, Pakistan has been a security state for long, and a lot of us have criticized this approach and said that Pakistan needed to spend on development. I don't think that this is what Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif meant when he said that we had admitted our faults. And now what he meant was, spending on conflict and spending on war with India, and this is basically the Prime Minister reaching out and saying that, we are ready for talks and peace in the region.
Right. Peace aside, the fact that India and Pakistan have not talked and have held an entire regional grouping such as SAARC to ransom when it comes to forward movement and regional cooperation. Do you see, in your reading, any forward movement with the Sharif government now in power?
I've written about it, and in fact, this morning I was speaking to another economist from Lahore University of Management Sciences who has spent years with ICRIA from India, working on, they were involved in, the trade negotiations between India and Pakistan. And there was quite a ground which was covered between 2000, I believe, between 2008 and 2017. And what happened, where it stopped, and I mean, if you talk to, for example, India's former High Commissioner TCA Raghavan or Sharad Sabharwal, they'll in fact tell you that how much ground was actually covered. I mean,
True.
Pakistan and India were close to a breakthrough in which Pakistan would have given India most favored nation status, and I mean, they were playing around with terminology as well, but the forward movement. Now, what broke the camel's back, sadly, was the differences between the Sharif government and the military in Pakistan. And so my argument is that even if Modi government is ready to talk to Pakistan, or Pakistan government is ready to talk to the Modi government, I think it's very important for both sides to mull over and really sort out the differences domestically at their ends, so that next time we are there close to reaching a breakthrough, there is no hurdle which turns the process around.
How deep-seated is the issue of corruption and instability within Pakistan, the political instability, and how are they factors in the state that Pakistan is in today?
Pakistan has corruption problem, of course. There is no doubt, but corruption itself doesn't stop economy or economic economy from growing. The problem is that corruption is mixed with a lack of initiative and lack of decision making. The problem, more than corruption, I think you need to understand how corruption strikes Pakistan, political corruption, not just financial corruption. For example, big sectors have to be taxed. And the problem is that big sectors, businessmen, agriculture, for example, in Pakistan, agriculture is not taxed. Similarly, big businessmen, don't, pay taxes. So
they're not honest.
These things, so that comes together, and Pakistan now, I mean, right now, IMF has recommended additional $600 billion in $600 billion in taxes, that Pakistan should impose more taxes because there is no other means of revenue generation.
On that note, a lot to think about, a lot to introspect, not just for the people of the country, but for the people making the policies in the country. Thank you so much, Aisha Siddiqui, for joining us here on India Today.
Welcome.
Great Britain is in a tussle with Scotland over gender reforms. Scotland passed a progressive bill in its parliament that allows self-identification process for changing gender. Gender recognition by individuals who identify themselves differently from the gender they were medically pronounced to be born with. One would have imagined that it would be a welcome sign, but London has a different take on the matter. The UK government says the changes could impact on equality laws that apply across Great Britain. How? We explain.
The motion is therefore agreed and the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill is passed.
Scotland's Parliament has approved reforms that make it easier for transgender people to change their legal gender. including removing the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria and lowering the minimum age to 16 from 18. The Gender Recognition Reform Bill, passed by 86 votes to 39, makes Scotland the first region of the United Kingdom to approve a self-identification process for changing gender. But the bill that awaits the royal assent is being blocked by the UK administration, saying it would have adverse effect on UK-wide equalities matter.
Let me be crystal clear that the decision in this case is centred on the legislation's consequences for reserved matters, as is laid out in the Scotland Act, which established the Scottish Parliament, which the Honourable Gentleman talks about, and at the time supported by the SNP. This bill would have a significant adverse effect on UK-wide equalities matters, and so the Scottish Secretary, with regret, has rightly acted.
In fact, Britain is invoking Section 35 of the Scotland Act, which allows a UK government Scottish secretary to prevent a bill passed by the Scottish Parliament from becoming a law. This is to prevent the Gender Recognition Reform Bill from gaining royal assent. The first time this has been done since the Scottish Parliament was created in 1999.
Today, I will make an order under Section 35 of the Scotland Act 1998, preventing the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from proceeding to royal assent. This order will mean the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament will not submit the bill for royal assent. This government believes, however, that transgender people deserve our respect, our support and our understanding.
There are countries, including Ireland, Denmark and Argentina, who have adopted self-ID laws to make it simpler and less invasive to change gender. Trans campaigners welcomed the reforms, but critics are worried that allowing anyone to self-identify as a woman could affect women's rights, making it easier for predatory males to access single-sex spaces such as bathrooms and changing rooms.
In my view, there are no grounds to challenge this legislation. It is within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. It doesn't affect the operation of the Equality Act, and it was passed by an overwhelming majority of the Scottish Parliament after very lengthy and very intense scrutiny by MSPs of all parties represented in the Parliament. So if there is a decision to challenge, then in my view it will be quite simply a political decision, and I think it will be using trans people, already one of the most vulnerable, stigmatised groups in our society, as a political weapon, and I think that will be unconscionable and indefensible and really quite disgraceful.
Mr. Speaker.
The row over Scotland's gender reforms will end up in court in Edinburgh at the Court of Session. The Scotland Act sets out very specific tests which allow the UK government to veto the bill. The question is not whether or not members of the Scottish Parliament were right to legislate on gender reform. It is about whether if the reforms would have broader consequences which could affect how UK-wide legislation works.
6 to 39, including MSPs from every single party.
That's all in this edition of World Today, but before we go, there is a new study that has revealed that Greenland recorded the highest temperature in 1,000 years. The temperature in the area rose to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the average since 1995. Experts believe this is a clear sign of global warming. The data reveals samples taken from deep within ice sheets and glaciers from the region have warmed substantially. Greenland's ice melts are also contributing to the rising sea levels. On that note, goodbye and take care.